Hi, my name's Clay Cooper and I'm the Ag and Natural Resources Agent here in Citrus County. I want to welcome you to the fencing breakout session, part of the North Florida Livestock Agents Group Livestock and Forages Field Day. Today we're going to go over some fencing basics, why we fence, the laws regarding fencing, some of the common tools that we'll use in fence building, and then also how to construct the fence. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Ed Jennings, who is the Livestock and CED in Levy County, and we can go ahead and get rolling.
Hi, I'm Ed Jennings, County Extension Director with the University of Florida IFAS Extension Service in Levy County. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about fencing for the farm and why we do fencing. Fencing can accomplish several goals for us on the farm. It can establish legal boundaries. There is a Florida fence law in this state that does give some direction on what constitutes a legal fence. At the same time, fencing can obviously keep our livestock where we want them, when we want them. And in some cases, fencing is utilized to prevent predator issues. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about some of the basic tools that you can get by with. You know, safety is a big issue when you're working with fencing. Preferably to wear a long sleeve shirt, long pants, steel-toed shoes. Leather gloves are real handy, especially when you're working with barbed wire. Don't forget about the sunscreen protection. Insects can be an issue sometimes. You might want to have that in your kit. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some basic tools this morning. And even if you're not going to be building a lot of fence of your own, these tools are really handy to have for patching breaks. Tree falls on a fence in the middle of the night or in a storm. Somebody runs off the road with their car and runs through your fence. Regardless of what kind of fence you got, you can patch it up quickly in the middle of the night with some barbed wire if you have some basic tools and know a little bit about what you're doing. And usually, a claw hammer is going to be something that you probably would have anyway, and it is certainly a really, really handy tool for fencing. These pliers are called fencing tools. Some people call them staple pullers. I've heard them called that. And they're a multi-purpose tool they're very, very handy in fence construction and patching. You can see it's got this hook on there to remove staples when you're renovating a fence. I'm not sure if you can zoom in on this and see that there's cutters on the side here where you can actually cut wire with this on that side. Just snap that right off quite easily. There's a lot of leverage because these are really long handled. And then there's several different grips on there for handling and twisting wire. They actually have sort of a little hammerhead on them. My experience is that's not terribly effective for putting staples in, but in a pinch it will work. Not nearly as good as a hammer. You just don't have the weight to it. So that's a multi-purpose fence tool. Another really, really handy tool to have is a pair of lineman pliers. These are 9-inch lineman pliers, a little bit longer than usual. Help you with that grip on cutting wire, twisting wire, and working with it. So those are some real basic ones as far as hand tools. I have an example of a fence stretcher here, which is primarily used for barbed wire, in that you can take and put a piece of wire, one end of a broken wire in this grip, like so. You clamp it down on there. Then you do the same with your other end over here, and then this thing ratchets them together. So you can take the slack out of a broken fence. So this is an excellent patching tool for those emergencies where that tree falls on that fence in a storm or something like that. For a little bit more advanced pulling in fence construction, you might want to use this come along, which puts some serious pressure on the wires you pull. You do have to have a special grip. This is the kind that I like. This is the kind that electrical workers use on our service lines for our power to our homes. What I like about this is it's got a really long set of jaws, and it will not put a significant amount of pressure on one single point. As you can see, it spreads that pressure out over about a 2.5 inch area there, so it doesn't damage this wire when we're putting a lot of pressure on it. Because when we're pulling these wires to get them really tight with these come-alongs, you can easily put a couple of thousand pounds of pressure on that wire, and if you've got a different kind of grip, sometimes you will damage that wire and it may break later on.
All right, so Mr. Ed had introduced us to some of the common fence building tools that we should keep in our toolbox, and now that we've gone through that, we're going to get into the actual fence construction. So whenever we start building a fence, it's important that we start with our corners, and especially when we're building our exterior fences. So when you start on your corners, you want to go ahead, set your corner post. Most of the time what we're going to want to use, or what we would be recommending, would be utilizing an 8-inch corner post. Make sure that those posts are pressure treated. You can save a couple dollars and buy, an 8-inch post, but a lot of times what you're going to find is the quality of the post is going to be the driving factor for those materials. And so there is a difference in the grade of pressure treat. So make sure that you're getting a post that is well pressure treated. It'll save you a lot of time down the road from having to do repairs, especially when we're talking about our corners, because that's essentially the backbone for your fence. So whenever we start on these posts, my personal liking is to get an 8-inch post, put about 4 foot in the ground, leaving roughly 4 foot above. At that point, whenever we go to secure those corner posts, there's a couple different things that we can do to get those posts set. We can backfill them with the dirt that we removed from that hole. If you do so, you want to make sure that you pack that post from the initial fill-in. So when you put dirt in, pack that post tight, and as you start filling, continue to pack it. If you backfill that hole and pack at the top, you don't get it completely compacted throughout and get that post set, and so you will have some wiggle room, which will allow that fence to lean or sag once you start putting pressure on it. Another option that you could do to set the pole would be to concrete them. You can take a bag of concrete, mix it up, concrete around there, give yourself a solid base. The downfall to this that can happen, and it's going to happen over time. It's definitely not going to be something that's going to be instant, but with that concrete, it's an impervious surface, so water can be retained at the top of that concrete and begin to rot those posts over time. It will, like I said, take some time. It's not going to be instant, but it's something to kind of keep in mind. One thing that I like to do whenever we're setting posts, especially our corners, to try to prevent that, is get crushed lime rock or any type of gravel for that matter. If you can backfill those holes with the gravel, they will actually pack in there tight, and it will wick moisture from those posts and keep it from setting on top of your concrete that you've applied. So once we have set the corner post, you want to set both corners for the line that you're going to be stretching. Go ahead and run yourself a string line from post to post at 48 inches, however high your fence is going to be, so that way you can get the rest of your line posts set at the proper height. This is going to be important, especially when we're starting to stretch our wires. That way, if we're using bob wire or high tensile wire, we can maintain our spacings of those wire strands and keep that fence uniform. When we get the corner set, we've stretched our line. At that point, we would want to start building our H-braces. So the H-brace is going to be the strength and stability for that fence. It's going to allow you to put some pressure whenever you are stretching your wire to get your fence tight. And at that point, on our corners, what we like to do is build a double H-brace. We'll have some pictures to show you of what a double H-brace looks like. If you're building a fence around the backyard and it's not going to be containing animals or so forth, you can utilize just a single H-brace, but anytime that we're going to be trying to contain livestock where they're going to be putting pressure on that fence, we really want to try to build a double H-brace, and then from there, when we start stretching wire, your wire rolls are typically going to be 330-foot rolls, and so when we get to the end of a roll, at that point in time, we'd like to build a single H-brace just for support throughout that stretch. So again, on our corners, build a double H brace. It'll really help you put some tension on that wire when you're stretching it. It'll keep that fence strong, and you're going to do that off of both ends. So you're going to have your corner post set coming off of the one side for your perimeter and coming off the other corner. You're going to build your double H braces there because that will allow you to pull from both directions when you're doing your perimeter fencing. And then again, like I said, as we get to the end of a roll, build yourself a single H brace. That will allow you to have some more strength and stability. Now that we've got those H braces built, we need to talk about wrapping your wire to finish out the construction of them. When we're building a double H brace, we can get by with a single wrap wire going from the top and bottom of the pole, and we'll have some pictures to show you what that looks like as part of the presentation. And then whenever we're building a single H brace, we want to double wrap them. So that would be 4 wires, and we're going to wrap from top to bottom here, and then top to bottom coming from the other direction. And then you'll go ahead and wrap those wires and pull them tight to keep that brace intact. So at that point, we've now got our braces built, and it's time to start setting line posts. So again, we've already stretched our string from corner post to set our post height. And then at that point, we'll go through, dig our holes, and start setting line posts. Again, most of the time on these line posts, we're not going to go through the trouble of concreting them or anything like that. We're just going to go ahead and backfill those with the dirt or soil that we've removed from that hole. But we do want to keep in mind to pack those posts as we're going. We don't want to wait till we get to the top because that will allow those posts to have some wiggle room. If you do want to preserve the life of those posts, you can rock them as well, but it will be a little more cost, going into the build of the fence, and also a little more time and labor for the construction side. But it will help preserve the life of those posts from wicking some of that moisture off. So now we've set our line post, we've had them and we got them in place, we got everything packed, everything's good to go, and now it's time to put up some wire. Wire is going to be widely variable. We could have bob wire, we could have high tensile wire, you could have field fence. There's endless options out there right now. I mean, you could even go with board fencing, and a lot of that decision making is going to depend on your operation, the type of livestock and animals that you have present, if you're trying to keep predators out, and really what the intended use of the fence is. So for instance, if we're dealing with cattle and we're trying to maintain them, we can get by with using bobbed wire, high tensile wire, anything along those lines. From a predation standpoint, you're really not going to be able to keep predators out because they will be able to get either through that fence, under the fence, or vice versa. So if predation is a factor and something that we're trying to control within our operations, we could, look and lean more towards using actual field fence. That's going to be a more solid construction, so that way there's nowhere for animals to be able to get through unless you're dealing with, a coyote or something like that that's able to dig and get under that fence. Another thing to keep in mind though is wire isn't created equally, just like our fence posts aren't created equally. When we start looking at post and wire, the grade and quality of those can vary. We talked about with the post about the level of pressure treating that they can go through, and also the the type of wood, how hard or how soft that particular wood is. And the same goes for fence. And when we're dealing with wire, you have class 1 wire or galvanized wire, and then you also have class 3. Class 3 is going to be what would be recommended. It's going to be more durable, it's going to hold up better. Class 1, you don't really see it hold up as well. It'll definitely start to rust and fall apart on you much quicker than class 3. From a cost standpoint, class 1 is going to be cheaper, but if you're wanting to build these fences, especially when we're talking about exterior fences and trying to keep our livestock in and keep them from getting out on the roads or getting mixed in with our neighbors' animals, you're really going to want to take that additional effort, put up that class 3. It's going to last a lot longer. It's going to save you a lot of headaches from having to do repairs, and just the longevity of that fence is going to serve you well. So again, like I said, make sure when you're buying fence to look for that class 3 wire, especially on your perimeter fencing. When we start talking about the different types, as we mentioned, with barbed wire, high tensile wire, field fencing, some of that decision making again will come into animals. We talked about if you have cattle being able to get by with barbed wire and high tensile. You know, for instance, with goats and sheep, that may not be an option. You know, they can be able to get through there pretty easily. We definitely try to avoid barbed wire anytime we're dealing with horses or high tensile wire as well, because if they do go through that fence for whatever reason, it will more than likely they'll get wrapped up in it and cause, you know, additional harm to that animal. So if we're dealing with horses, you really want to focus on some field fencing or even doing board fencing for that matter. One thing I did forget to mention, I just thought about it here when we're talking about actual fence material, when we're setting our line post, we need to kind of keep in mind our post spacings. So if we're doing a field wire and we're starting to stretch that, those fence the fence post spacings can be anywhere from about 8 to 12 foot. We really don't want to get much past 12 foot on field fence, because when you're putting tension on it, it will allow that fence to have some room to potentially sag or to be loose. Now when we switch gears and we're focusing on barbed wire or high tensile wire, we're able to put a lot more tension on that and get it pulled a lot tighter. And so we can actually stretch out those fence post spacings to, you know, anywhere from 15 to 20 feet, which will help minimize the amount of post needed to run a stretch. But then again, like I said, that's going to be dependent on the type of wire that you're using. So if we are using field fence, 8 to 12 foot, you know, on your fence post spacings, a high tensile wire, barbed wire, anywhere from about 15 to 20 feet would be sufficient. All right, so now that we've determined what wire we're using, we've started to get that wire stretched and in place, now it's time to tack the wire up. A lot of times this can be overlooked. You know, when we think about tacking your fence, we're looking into staples, and we may not always put a lot of stake into that. But anytime we're dealing with fencing materials, we definitely want to you know, pay attention to the quality of the staples that we're buying, because that is going to be your bread and butter for keeping that fence up. If you buy or use staples that aren't efficient for the job, they are going to back out on you, and you're going to have fence coming loose, and you're going to be out there repairing a ton of fence. So a good recommendation from a staple standpoint would get a staple that is about 1 3/4 to 2 inches long. You're going to want to make sure that they have a barb on them, so that way once you drive that staple into the post, it's got enough meat to it that it's got a good bite. You know, you got enough, you know, 1 3/4 to 2 inches of actual staple driven in there, so it's going to have some good bite and hold that fence in place. But those barbs are going to be able to keep that staple from backing out on you. Another tool that can be used when we're dealing with fencing, as far as splicing 2 strands together, or if we're dealing with field fence and we're needing to put 2 rolls together, you can manually splice them together, but there are some other tools out there now. One of them would be a gripple, and what that is it's actually a little a tool that you'll put wire in from both ends, and when you slide it in and you pull tight, it'll actually lock inside there, allowing you to splice wire and keep your line going.
We'll talk to you a little bit about splicing together 2 pieces of barbed wire, in not using a gripple or a clamp type system. If you don't happen to have one of those, in an emergency, you can splice 2 pieces of barbed wire together fairly easily. First thing I do is get some gloves on, because I usually wind up getting cut, which I might anyway. But the first thing I'm going to do is prepare these ends, and I like to get some space where I don't have barbs for my splicing. So I'm going to trim this, if I can get it cut. Trim that off. And this is the other piece that I'm going to cut into, and you can see I've got a barb right there on it as well, so I'm going to cut it off so that I've got two good pieces without a lot of barb getting in my way. So you're going to overlap these two pieces of wire by about that much. I'm going to take my fence tool and I'm going to grip it like so. And this top one, I'm going to bring it to me. I'm going to twist it around by hand a couple of times like so. Move it down. I'm going to get into this middle section where there is no barb and get it like that. And at this point, I want it really tight. So I'm going to use the pliers to twist this around. The secret to this is getting these twists to lie right beside each other. You can see that what we wind up with here is we got 1, 2, 3, 4 of those really tight twists on there. That will hold the strength of the wire. And what I would do now is on the other side, I will go the other way and do the exact same thing. Once you get this finished, this splice will not slip. It will break if you pull the wire tight enough, but these when you have them twisted that tightly beside each other, they will not slip. So that makes a non-slip splice, even if you don't have tools for an emergency, or if you just want to join two pieces of wire together for fence construction or patching.
Now that we've got the exterior of our fence built, it's time to start looking at some interior fencing. We have quite a few options. One of the things that we didn't cover for exterior fencing is the use of electric fence. This can be extremely beneficial whenever we are doing some interior fencing. It allows us some flexibility. We can go out there and move our fiberglass poles pretty easily, move the polywire or whatever electrical fencing that we're using, and we can start to manage our grazing systems a little more efficiently. So at this point, I mean, we can go with a more permanent type fence if we want to build interior fences and use wire and posts. We can do that as well, but if you're wanting to have something that provides you with a little more flexibility, you can. There are several different types of polywires that can be used. You have a polywire rope here. Then you have more of a thin lined ribbon. And then you also have some that is going to be much wider of a ribbon, and all of these are going to function the same way. It's just going to depend on, you know, your preference, what you're looking for in that operation. But by taking and building those interior fences, we can start to manage our grazing systems, as I mentioned. You know, so we can turn our livestock out, we can allow them to graze the field until it gets to the targeted stubble height for whatever forage species it is that we have growing. For Bahia grass, for that instance, you know, we're going to be around 3 inches, and then we're going to want to move those animals on to the next pasture. And then by having this electrical fencing for our interiors, we can do that pretty easily. And then at that point, like I said, if we don't want to deal with electrical fencing, because it can be a little more of a challenge, especially when we're trying to deal with electrical fence chargers, if we're trying to get those fences grounded well so that way they're functioning as they should, it can be a little more of a challenge. And so it's not for everybody, but it is an option or a management tool that we do have to keep in mind and keep in our back pockets. But like I said, if it's not up your alley and not something that you want to do, you can start to build those permanent interior fencing, and again we would do that the same way. We would pick us a corner spot, especially maybe where we've already put in a a single H brace with our exterior lines. We can go ahead and come off of that and start building some interior fences, come off those H braces, set your line post again, run your string, get everything set, and start building from there. And we're going to follow the same guidelines that we used on our exterior fencing.